Hi everyone, and thank you for joining me to this talk about amassing tech capital and leaving tech debt behind. I'm Aviv Ben-Yosef, advisor and coach to tech executives based in Israel, and also the author of the recently published book, The Tech Executive Operating System. And today I want to share with you something that I hope will help you make your team have a greater impact on the business and also help you specifically as leaders in tech have, more of an accomplishment by knowing that you are helping your team grow, become better, and transitioning from, senior and principal engineers to what I call product engineers. So let's get to it. In the past year, I've talked to literally hundreds of CTOs, VPs of engineering, CEOs, both because that's part of my work, but also because I've been researching for my book. And one of the questions I kept asking them was, how do you measure the success of your R&D team, of the R&D and engineering organization as a whole? How can you say they are doing things right? We are doing things right. How can you tell whether you should be pleased or not with what you are doing? And I frankly got the feeling that we are not measuring in most organizations the right thing, because the answer I kept getting back was, we are checking to see that the team delivers on what it promised. We had a roadmap and people delivered on it. If we get that, that's a success. But frankly, I'm feeling like that's not really, what we should be aiming for. It's like, congrats, you did your work. You did what you said you were gonna do. Kind of like handing out participation awards. Everyone gets it. You just need to show up and bam, you got an award. And I felt like something's missing here. And some of those who look a bit further, those CTOs, those VPs of engineering who look a bit further, told me they're not just looking at their roadmap and delivering on that, but they expect something more, which is having low tech debt, having a high quality bar, which is great. But I'm feeling, I'm still not feeling it. It's a bit off. And here you can see in this meme, and I'm trying not to use memes too much nowadays, but I feel like this really captures the essence of my feeling. It's like, all right, so we're going from clickety-clack to doing what we promised to high quality, low debt. That sounds great, but isn't there something more that we need to be aiming for? Can we get something more? Can we have a bigger impact on the business? Should we really be focusing on tech debt so much? I see so many job descriptions saying, join a team obsessed with low debt, obsessed with high quality code. And that's great. I'm not saying we shouldn't care about that. But I'm wondering if that really is the pinnacle of amazing software engineering. Is that it? Because frankly, what I'm feeling is that this is sort of a meets expectations kind of thing. Do you know the term from performance reviews in some major corporations? You get a meets expectations. You're doing what we were expecting you to do. Amazing. Sort of. Where's the exceeding expectations part? Where can we have a difference here? And that's basically what we're going to be talking about today. And to help you understand the mindset, I'm going to try and use an analogy. Have you ever seen this constant talk when it comes to personal finances about people who try and be so frugal to save their money, to become independent, that, and I'm not judging anyone specifically if you're doing it. I'm talking about a mindset as an analogy. I've seen people focus and obsess about saving every little penny, trying to lower their credit card use, being obsessed with how much are they using on credit and how much are they spending, and trying to lower every single cost they have. And, that's not something you shouldn't be doing. You should be doing it to an extent. But my problem is that there's a limit to how much you can save. There's a limit to how many costs you can cut. For example, the most interesting example I keep seeing is people talking about cutting the amount of cappuccinos they have a day, right? I'm not going to spend money on 3 cappuccinos a day, and so by the end of the year, I'm going to save so much money. That's nice, but by the end of the year, you have a clear cap here. There's a limit. You can only save up to the cost of 3 cappuccinos a day. No more. So even if you do your best, you have a perfect day, which I'm not sure a perfect day is a day without cappuccinos, but that aside, let's say you just had a perfect day. What did you get? The money that those 3 cappuccinos would have brought you. That's it. And, there's a limit, there's a cap. What about, when it comes to personal finances, we're talking about, what about getting more money rather than focusing on spending less? And the same applies, in my opinion, to tech debt. There's a limit to how much lower you can get your debt to be, even if you have 0 debt, which I'm not sure is the right thing to do, even in a perfect world. But let's say you're getting down to 0 debt. What do you do then? What do you get then? And I think there are a few reasons why we as an industry as a whole are obsessing too much about lowering tech debt. First of all, frankly, it's the path of least resistance. It's something that we know how to do. We don't need to ask too many people around us. Even as a CTO, you usually don't need to talk to your counterpart in product when you want to invest some time in lowering debt. It might be just a matter of the standards you have in your team. It might be how you decide to spend hackathons you have. I don't know. But it is the path of least resistance. No one else is going to ask you about it. You can decide to do things without involving anyone else, and you know what to do, right? It has less risk. It's within our comfort zone. As techies, as engineers, we know what to do, we know what's right, and it feels sexy, right? It feels like the right thing to do. It feels like it might help you gather the right talent in your company because you're saying, hey, come work with me. We have no debt, which is nice. But again, it's not there, if you're getting me. And the major reason I think we focus too much on debt is because it is what engineers can see every day. It's very, very visible. It's very easy to note. And when that is the situation, the engineers notice it a lot and they focus on it. And the question is, how can we help our engineers see that they can provide value and not just try and lower costs? And just as with the analogy of the cappuccinos, and I'm asking how can we make more money, I want to ask you, what can you do as a leader of an engineering team to amass more value, to create value for the organization? Some people call this impact, some people call this leverage. Whatever it is, the question is, what can you do to help your team deliver it? Not just focus on lowering costs, but actually bring in more value, tangible effects on the business. And that's the big question. And I have a rather interesting idea for you, and that is, I'm guessing you've already realized by now, the concept of tech capital. And trying to define it a bit, I defined it in my book at length, but here I just want to say that for me, tech capital is amassing processes, knowledge, technology, tools that end up enabling and creating a moat, a discernible difference between you and your competitors, something that makes you better. And let me just state here that I'm not talking about features. Features are not tech capital most of the time. Features to your product are not. And that is because just as you have a shiny new feature is just like a shiny new car. You get it, it's very nice, it's pretty, you're gonna tell everyone about it, but the second you got it, it starts lowering in value, and you also have to constantly maintain it. That's not exactly my definition of capital. So to help you understand what I'm talking about, I want to share a bunch of examples that I've seen in real live clients in the past 6 months alone. These are all real examples that I've either seen or helped companies realize they need to be doing, and companies ranging from 5 engineers to hundreds. Right? And no matter what size organization you have, you can create tech capital. So just a few ideas. I don't want to go too much into them because you'll have your own, but let's quickly go over them. One of them is email as an enabler, and that is something I've seen at, like a dozen companies by now. When you start, email is something that involves engineering way too much. Every new email, every change to a template might require your engineers to be involved, to actually go and commit something new to get and make sure that it happens. But I've seen some companies realize that they were creating a bottleneck that wasn't necessary and invest time in either creating an internal CMS or integrating an external tool that made it so that for not 100%, but 80% of the time, engineering wasn't needed, wasn't involved in making changes to emails and even adding some new ones. And all of a sudden, people in product, people in marketing could change things, perform tests without having to involve engineering, without having to schedule time on the sprint for the vast majority of the ideas they had. And this ended up being like a capability enabler for people in product, for example, because all of a sudden they can do a bunch of stuff they never even would have considered because it had too great a cost. It had to be involving engineers. It had to be planned on the sprint plan. But if they can just tinker, if they can do stuff because they have an idea, you've just enabled them a whole cosmos of opportunity. That's tech capital. Another example is I had one client that decided to spend, I think, a week of engineering time to create an internal back office tool that collected a bunch of data about their market, did some data science wizardry, and all of a sudden they now had an internal tool, not something that's related to their product. It's not a new feature. It's an internal tool for their sales team that now shows them on a map how their different people in their market are changing their behavior. They were seeing all sorts of spending, where it was located. They could easily see trends right there on a map of the United States. And so that enabled that sales team to create rapidly the right kind of pipeline. They knew where they needed to focus. And that's a superpower. No one even thought about it from the sales team. They didn't even consider it. They were used to doing things the way they were used to. But all it took is one engineer thinking about it when he was chatting to someone from sales, and magic. And that's the mind-blown thing I have here in step 4 in this meme. Another example, of course, I'm guessing you've seen it, is investing in our own frameworks, in our own environments. DevOps investments that make engineering much faster because you can set up a test on a new testing environment like that. You don't have to think about it. Or maybe DevOps investments that make it so you don't have to fear rolling out a new deployment because it would be easy to roll back should you need it. Those sort of things are also enablers because you do it once and all of a sudden everyone from here till eternity can do things more easily. And one last example is having the ability to enable others in the company do stuff faster. For example, creating a sort of framework that enables quick testing, A/B testing for people in product and marketing, or creating a framework that allows you to have very rapid POCs or POVs when you're working with new prospects. If you ever worked in a B2B style company, you've probably seen this kind of thing where you have a new prospect and the company does this POC to help make sure that whatever the client needs you can address. And that often means that you're doing some tweaks to make it so it perfectly fits their needs. Some companies, specifically this one company I recently worked with, ended up creating a small internal framework that allowed their people who weren't software engineers actually tinker with customization and configuration for the client and save like 80% of the engineering work required, sometimes even more, when they had a new POC to do. And again, that's magic. Someone else in the company now has superpowers, and the engineers now have more time to do other stuff. That's what I'm driving toward. That's, for me, tech capital. And you might be wondering, how can I get there? And a big part of enabling your team to even have the time to do these sort of things is to start by understanding that there's a kind of paradigm when it comes to thinking about R&D and engineering, and that we need to have a shift. And that is the shift from a cost center thinking to an innovation center. Cost center, I'm guessing you know, is a part of your business that you just have to have. It doesn't provide you with inherent value. It is just something that you have, and you have to pay the cost for it. It's just the cost of, doing business. And more often than not, R&D and engineering specifically ends up being looked at as a cost center. If I could run the company without these engineers, I wouldn't have them, right? They don't provide value inherently, as opposed to sales, who bring on more sales, marketing, bring on more clients. These things end up amassing value, but the code itself, who wants it, right? And the difference between a cost center and an innovation center is if you create an innovation center, all of a sudden you are creating things that actually bring on more value. You're not just focusing on lowering tech debt, which is what we talked about earlier. You're focusing on providing the company with more value, things that can enable the company as a whole to be more valuable, to have an ARR that's growing more rapidly. And that is the shift that we're wanting to make in our organization. But it's not a trivial shift. And with that in mind, I want to share a few specific tactics which are about making space for becoming an innovation center and the paradigm shifts that you need to make in order to have this kind of thinking throughout your organization, throughout the ranks. And I've helped multiple companies make this shift. I can promise you that it is possible, and it boils down to just how hungry are you for this kind of effect. Do you want to always and forever lead a cost center, or do you want to be in charge of an innovation center, of a place that actually has a noticeable, tangible impact on the business, on the bottom line of the company, and that actually brings on novel ways of doing things that end up making the product better, end up making the lives of your peers in the company better? That's the thinking. That's the motivation. And that's the kind of fire that you need to have in order to have the wherewithal to push your team and maybe even your entire company forward and achieve that. All right. And with that in mind, let's go with the first step to make more space for innovation, and that is making wiggle room. And I'm talking about the fact that if you are considered as a cost center, and unless you did something proactive, it is likely that your CEO, for example, considers R&D as a cost center. And in that situation, what you do with cost centers is that you try and minimize cost. That means that, for example, your budget is tailored specifically to whatever roadmap you are being given. So the company has decided about a roadmap for 2021, and now your budget is adjusted accordingly. And all of a sudden, the problem is that if your team is specifically tailored to achieve that roadmap, you don't have any wiggle room to do any of the extra stuff I just talked about. How can you have a week to create this cool data science tool for sales if that means that's a week less working on your roadmap, which you sized your organization exactly to, right? So you need to make sure that you have budget that allows for some buffer. You need to have teams that maybe are a slight bit bigger. That's healthy in general, not just for having innovation. For example, people are gonna leave, so you need to hire for churn because your best people even will eventually leave, so you need to adjust for that. And the same thing goes here. If you're tailored specifically to a roadmap, you have what I call a JIRA resolving machine. That's all you can do because those are the tools you're given. Don't do it that way. Don't commit fully. Don't commit to 100% of your capacity because then not just that you have a likelihood of missing deadlines and having a bunch of errors that end up being critical because you don't have any time and capacity to fix them and treat them properly. You also don't have any time, to lift your head from the keyboard, look ahead and realize where you should be going. What can you do? And as a leader, this is a must. And as a leader, I call this moving upstream. But even for your team, they need to have the time to breathe a bit and think about the way they're doing stuff. The thing about if I had only an hour to cut down a tree, I would spend the first 50 minutes sharpening my axe. That's the kind of stuff. But if you're busy trying to knock off tree after tree, you don't stop and understand and realize, oh, I need to be sharpening my axe, right? And how do we make the time for that kind of sharpening and trying stuff? That's step number 2 in making space. And that is creating a healthy framework for testing, for experimenting, for trying stuff. I call these intermissions. Some companies call these sabbaticals. I think Basecamp calls these sabbaticals. And basically what intermissions are is the concept of creating time for teams to research together. I'm not talking about the 20% time kind of thing that you might have heard about in Google because that's personal. That's one day Alice is working on something, and the next day Bob is working on it as well as part of this big project they're doing in their 20% time, but they're not working together. And also, it is only a day once a week, and I feel like that's not the right cadence. What I've seen work in companies globally and in engineering teams and research teams is the concept of intermissions, where it depends. In this example, I'm putting intermissions, as you can see on screen, between every sprint. Sometimes it's between every 2-3 sprints. It depends on whatever works for you. But the concept is if you have, for example, a 3-week sprint, after it, you get a week of intermission where each team is responsible for creating its own personal backlog and having a noticeable impact coming out of maybe not every intermission, but out of most. Maybe they learned something new. Maybe they created a tool like we just described. Maybe they were investing in lowering some tech debt. That's also something that you need to be doing from time to time. But all of a sudden, you're creating this kind of space, this framework that everyone knows it's coming. I have a problem with hackathons that happen like once a year, because it's like you're telling your people, you have that hackathon in 6 months and I don't want to hear about any innovation till then. That's essentially what you're doing. And if I know that I have an intermission coming up pretty much every month, I know that I need to start planning for it. People start expecting it, and they start having these personal to-do lists of what I'm going to try, and they start gathering ideas, and they have these brainstorming sessions of maybe we should try this, and on the next intermission, let's do that. And I've seen that happen. And when that transition happens, when I see an engineer with her own list, I know that, all right, intermissions have clicked for the organization. I know that they're gonna get something out of it. And that's basically a magical point. And not every intermission is going to be amazing, but frankly, some intermissions should be providing you what one team I worked with called a bonanza. I think within 2 months of implementing intermissions, they had such a discovery, such a move forward that helped them achieve so much value and impact on the company that the CEO was like, he was sold. A minute after he saw that, he realized, all right, these intermissions things that I allowed them to do because they kept nagging me about them, they make sense. All right, I get it now. Let's do it regularly. That's the kind of thing we want to see. And intermissions are a way to get there. You might need to be finding your specific way. And again, a bunch of companies are doing different things. I'll be happy to chat about it if you want later, either on the Slack or if you want to reach out to me. And you can read about, for example, base camps, sabbaticals, and in my book, in one of the chapters, I talk about this a bunch. So feel free to research a bit, but I think this is extremely valuable. And I've seen this implemented in teams of all sizes, and again, globally. And next is the concept of helping your team realize, what are they doing? And that's something that you might just have to implement in retrospectives that you're already doing. It might be something that's actually the subject of some of your intermissions, but the concept is, how do we improve our efficacy? You know, there's a difference between doing things right and doing the right things, and that's efficacy. And I want to make sure that teams that are doing intermissions, for example, have an ROI kind of thinking. What's the return on investment? Is the business becoming better? Are they managing their own personal backlogs that have actual impactful things that might be very, very successful, things that might change the entire company, things that are actual tech capital, or are they filled with tech debt, learning the new thing, Node.js package or stuff like that? And our efficacy has to be attuned here. And in order to achieve that, you need to manufacture serendipity. And you do that by creating what I call product mastery. You have to ensure that every single engineer really masters the product, really understands the market, your users, your competition, and only by having that kind of knowledge, those people can then come up with ideas of helping and making things better. So for example, I had one CTO tell me, we had this big outage, and because of that, pretty much everyone in engineering ended up doing customer success for a couple of weeks. And that was amazing because now they all understood what customer success are doing every day here, and they had a bunch of amazing ideas about improving the product, improving our processes, and that's magical. That's what I call product mastery. When people understand the product, they understand what your users are thinking, and then they come up with their own ideas. I actually talked about this at length in several places, and you can get at the end of this talk, I'll have a link to a cheat sheet that has a bunch of information about product mastery for yourself and for your engineers. And next, when it comes to making space, we need to adjust the way we're thinking to a way of placing bets. When you have an intermission, you want to make sure that at least some of those things you're doing can be bonanzas. You cannot allow for everything in the intermission to just be a slam dunk. I know that I can create this thing, and by the end of the intermission week, we'll have this tool and we'll be happier. It's good to have it, 70% of the time. But sometimes you need to be placing bets. Nassim Taleb talks about, I think he calls it the barbell strategy. You want to make sure that you're placing some bets where what you're putting as at risk is, limited. There's a cap to it. At worst, we just spent an intermission week on it, and that's it. That's what we're going to lose if we failed. But the gain might be, unlimited. If we're right, if this thing that we're trying works, it will save us, 3 days a week for the customer success team every week. It will enable us to create this new product offering that no one thought was possible because of this and that capability not being available. Something. You should have some of these. This is exactly where innovation happens. When you're doing stuff that's not guaranteed to succeed, and you have to ensure that some of the intermissions are spent placing the right sort of bets. And we're not talking about a casino bet where you don't know what's going to happen and you might go home broke. Place these barbell bets where one side is capped and the gain is much, much, much bigger. All right? And after you've made space by having a bigger budget, by having intermissions, and by making those intermissions be of greater efficacy and with some bets, you need to make some shifts in your thinking. The first one is coders without borders. Your engineers are not solely intended to do whatever helps the product directly. That might be the vast majority of the work, but look around. You have so many other people in the company that coders can help. You can help the sales team like I talked about in one of my examples. You can find out ways to make the lives of customer success better. You can help the people in marketing by providing them with tools to experiment faster. You can help pretty much everyone in the company. What's the limit to what you can get by having an engineer for a week? It can be magical. And to get that, you have to understand that your intermissions shouldn't be just focusing on what makes your coders faster and on what directly impacts the product. Look around and consider who else can we involve, who else can we help. It might be up to you to talk to your counterparts in the company. It might be something that's happening naturally, but you have to have this ingrained in people. We don't just help what's directly on the roadmap, we help everyone around us when possible. And another shift is, again, understanding that sometimes we have to embrace failure. I talked about placing bets, but whenever someone places a bet and fails, you chastise them, they're not going to do it again. If the expectation is that after every intermission we have to show what we have to show for it, and it always has to be something that exists and is tangible for every single intermission, people will remain within their comfort zone. They won't do anything that might turn out to be a bonanza. No risk, no gain. And this is entirely on you and on your management team. You all have to embrace failure and understand that sometimes failing is a must in order to eventually get the bonanza, in order to eventually get that thing that is not within your comfort zone and might not even be possible, but you're gonna work toward it because you realized it makes sense. All right. And I'm talking a lot about default responses. Make sure that when someone tells you their intermission has failed, you don't get angry. You don't shoot the messenger. You help the team work on their efficacy and make sure that they are placing the right bets. And lastly, this is very tactical, but sometimes when you only have a week to deliver, what I've seen work at some of the most innovative companies I'm working with is realizing that intermissions are where you need to make low code and no code tools shine. All of a sudden, you have this place where you don't have to have you need to do stuff right, but you don't have to have the right kind of bar that you would have for a product production system. So you can create these tools and experiments that enable stuff for everyone around the company, sometimes even for the engineers, with these low and no code tools. And some of these are doing amazing stuff. I'm guessing you've seen some, but I highly recommend edging your people and pushing them to go there and try and see what these tools can enable them. Because sometimes a day tinkering with a no-code solution can be worth as much as a whole week. And then suddenly a week of intermission can provide so much impact. It's just something that I'm seeing now, and I'm thinking this is a trend that's going to get much more important with time. So I'm urging you to start considering it right now. Once you have made all of that, you can now focus on amassing tech capital in your company. And I'm hoping that this has opened your eyes to thinking about things that you haven't considered earlier and realizing that there's a limit to how much you can cut in tech debt, but there's no limit to how much tech capital you can create and the amount of value and impact you can give your team that's not just making them meet expectations, but let's start exceeding expectations. That's my hope for the industry, and that's what I'm hoping to have helped you reach a bit today. If you're interested, you can grab a free cheat sheet of my book, The Tech Executive Operating System, in this link. And other than that, reach out to me. My Twitter here is on the screen. I would love to hear if you have any thoughts about implementing tech capital in your organization. Thank you.